confetti? No. When I asked my 697 class if they'd be interested in presenting on the issue of censorship, we had several volunteers, as you can see, because I think we all believe that a book can change your life. So I think that's why they're participating in this panel. The first handout, or the first thing I showed, was censorship causes blindness, please read. Okay. So I'm going to introduce the panel, and then I would like to talk about this poem that I found about the implications of censorship. As I told my techniques class this morning, I don't like to teach poetry because I feel uncomfortable with that. But this is a really good poem about the effects that censorship can have. The panel today, Jacinta Carter is a former 697 student, sorry, and she is a former teacher and can talk about censorship as it related to her position. Aaron Fisher, chemistry major, we won't hold that against him, chemistry major who read a book in young adult lit that I think changed his life. Shaylin was a former history major, and we swayed her back. We took her away from history and brought her to English because of a book that she read in class. Alina is an English major who's going to talk about a crucial book that deals with police brutality, a topic that I think is extremely relevant right now. Kristen, whatever, is a writing concentration major who loves to read and has been impacted by some of the books that she's read in class. Gabby is she's a foreigner. She's from Colorado Springs. She's a foreigner. She was in my class last semester. She was impacted in the class because she read books about bullying, victimization, and so I asked her if she would come and talk today about this new book about school shootings. So the topics that we're going to talk about today are relevant to them and relevant to our culture and society. Trey is going to talk about, was moved by the Holocaust and books dealing with the Holocaust, so he's going to talk about a particular book that he read that he thought that you would enjoy. Paula is an instructor at Fort Hays. She has an MA, MFA from Fort Hays, and has read several of John Green's novels. I don't know if you are all familiar with his novels, but they're all controversial. They're all on the banned book list, so that's what we're here today to talk about, banned books, why they're banned, and why these particular books made an impact on us, no matter what our discipline is. So, like I said, this poem touched me, so I thought I'd start off with that, and then we can just go this way, and you guys can talk about it. Sometimes after books had been forbidden, the one about the woman and her daughter, the one about the boy who spoke poorly, and after the smoke from the incinerators had cleared, it was suggested that censorship be extended to the plover, the wild turkey, the common moorhen. But these birds have done nothing, a few protested. That is precisely the problem, the loudspeakers answered. It rained that month, day and night. Men with nets fanned out into the fields and shouted to each other along the shorelines. Teachers disappeared on their way to cars. Then the committee, after the morning glory for its suggestive furling and unfurling and the ligistrum, would you mind moving that up for me, Trey? Thank you. Okay, because they were difficult to pronounce and spell. Then the pine tree for its tricky needles and cones and parsley and red and yellow peppers for no reason at all. You would think that the lock and the gate would be safe, but that was well before the whispering. Shaking hands on the street and hooking an arm around someone's waist became the subjects of discussion. across long granite tables behind dark glass doors, and the rain was constant and cold. Fine days to curl up with a good book, someone joked, but there were no more good books. Just the curling up of people quietly in corridors and doorways. Bits of straw floating down the streets, along the curbs, into turbulent rivers and out to sea. So censorship doesn't just deal with books. It deals with most facets of our society. When people can't understand that allowing people to read what they want to read is a bad thing. So anyway, I'm going to start with the panel, because I could probably talk the entire period, as they would attest to, and probably boo me if I decided to do that. So, Jacinta, do you want to tell us about your experience, and then we can go to Eric?
I taught high school English for a year, and my issue with banned books came up when I wanted to teach the novel Speak by Laura Helse Anderson. For those of you who don't know, this is a book about a girl who is raped, and I was told that I could not teach that book because if you talk to teenage girls about rape, it will encourage them to pretend they have been raped to get attention. That is what I was told by my administrators, which I found ridiculous because I have never heard of that happening. So instead of saying okay and going on my way, I got into a very loud discussion with the administrators about whether or not I could teach that book, and ended up saying some things that I probably shouldn't have. But then I was still told that I wasn't allowed to teach it, and that I couldn't teach other young adult novels or other novels that dealt with issues of sexual assault. So I had my Comp 2 class read books that are frequently banned and write papers about why they shouldn't be on the banned books list, because I'm bad at doing what I'm told apparently. And when I taught To Kill a Mockingbird, we did a lot of focusing on the case of sexual assault in that book and how that one was fake. And yeah, I ended up losing my job eventually, but if I could go back, I think the only thing I would change is I wouldn't have asked permission to teach Speak. I would have just done it. So I'm a big advocate for banned books.
Well, one of the things that John Green said too in an article that I just read recently is that people tend to take a portion of a book out of context. They don't read the entire book. So someone in Jacinta's position with an administrator who took a particular scene or a particular language out of context made a troublesome, really troublesome issue. And I think, I'm sorry that that's what happened to her, but she came back to Fort Hays, got her MA, and now she's going to be a wonderful teacher again, right? Yes. Okay. Mr. Fisher.
I would like to talk about the book Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. It's about a young boy on a Spokane Indian reservation in Washington and the struggles that he faces both in the tribe and when he leaves the tribe to go to a white school. And it talks about a lot of important issues, like the struggles that Native Americans face with prejudice and alcoholism, and I can see that being part Native American myself, even though I definitely don't look it. I can see a lot of the effects of alcoholism and neglect and the racism and things that take place still in modern society. And I feel like that book really woke me up to a lot of the things in my own life that reflect sort of this Native American heritage that I have. And it's really opened my eyes to be able to see what's going on around me and how I can maybe help people and make or break that cycle.
One of the issues that censors had with that book, and it's on the top 10 list of books that have been censored, and since the topic, I think, Brian, you might check me on this, is the topic diversity this year for Banned Books Week, or? Yes. A young adult was last year, but I think diversity is one of the issues this year. And this book and Toni Morrison's books have been banned for the last well, since 2009, because they deal with issues, as Aaron said. But the one issue that I thought was just totally erroneous was the fact that the family values in this book were, what's the word, were,
Atypical?
thank you, okay.
Non-traditional.
Thank you. Okay, so we have our panels kind of just sitting here.
I saved you this time.
We're abusive, and it's not true. And so that's another issue with censorship that I'll behave myself and then let Shaylin talk.
So as Dr. Wilson said, I was a history major before I became an English major. And looking at censorship not only from a literary perspective, but also from a historical perspective, if you look back in the times that there has been a great censorship of books and propaganda and material throughout history, it has never been a good thing. When Nazi Germany burned books and anything that had anything that could possibly be against what the Fuhrer wanted, it was a bad thing. They did that to prevent the spread of ideas and the spread of knowledge, to keep this public in the dark so that they wouldn't wake up and see, wow, this what's happening is not okay. And they do that to limit the education of the public. So for me, it's very infuriating, especially in schools, in public education, when books get banned, when issues such as rape are not talked about because it would just cause too much drama. It would be too much trouble to actually discuss something with these students, as opposed to just letting them be fed it through the media and through social media, TV, television, movies. Heaven forbid they actually have to read something and formulate their own opinions on it. That would just be the worst thing in the world. To me, when you tell a student that they cannot read a book, when you censor a book in the classroom, you're not just telling them, okay, this isn't something that you really need to be reading. You're telling them that the issues that are discussed in that book, the issues of diversity, the issues of gender violence, the issues of rape and sexual assault and abuse and alcoholism, drug use, that these issues don't matter, that they can be swept under the rug, that they're not something that we need to talk about, and that is absolutely not true. You tell them that because this might not specifically be happening to them in their life, it's not worth learning about. It's not worth hearing about. And that is such a toxic view, and that's one of the reasons that, in my opinion, that our society has the problems that it has. Instead of talking about these things and coming up with solutions to them, instead of reading a book and being able to put yourself in the shoes of an American Indian, in the shoes of a girl who's been sold into sexual slavery, instead of reading a book and getting that perspective, you sit in your classroom and you have the perspective of a small town Western Kansas kid, and that's all you get. And children that are not exposed to diversity become closed-minded adults. And closed-minded adults make decisions for the larger society, just like we're seeing in our election, that it doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't work. Maybe if these politicians and these people, these leaders today, had been exposed to some of this literature instead of being censored and saying, oh, well, it's not happening to me, we don't have to talk about it, maybe things would be different.
If anybody has a question or comment for any of our panel,
You're here.
Shaylin seems to be kind of shy, so if you have any questions for any of them, they'd be more than happy to answer. Thank you, dear. Alina, what do you think?
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about police brutality. About Keith Scott in Charlotte, North Carolina, all the protests and all the rioting that's going on down there. So this is a really relevant topic in society today. And Terrence Crutcher in Tulsa, Oklahoma, how Shelby was charged with, Officer Shelby was charged with manslaughter. And I read a book called All American Boys by Jason Reynolds, and it deals with police brutality. It talks about how a young African American was believed to be shoplifting, and an officer took him down and beat him nearly to death, and he was in the hospital throughout the entire novel. And it talks about how the children were taking sides and trying to decide whether or not the police officer, what he did was right or wrong. And I think that this topic is really relevant in society today, and kids should be talking about police brutality. instead of being sheltered from what's going on. And like she said, like teens should be formulating their opinions and reading novels like this to learn about police brutality, because it is a relevant topic in society today. People of different races are getting beaten and killed by police, and kids today should be able to formulate an opinion on that.
Well, I thought last night in the debate, I don't know if any of you watched the debate last night, but one of the points that I thought was, okay, one of the points that I thought was relevant was there needs to be a bridge between the police officers and diverse communities. There needs to be a coming together. How we do that, I don't know, but I thought that was relevant last night, at least from the Democratic point of view, that something needs to be done because police are in a bad position, minorities are in a bad position, especially in major cities, and young adult novels bring that perspective and that questioning and that critical thinking to the foreground. And I think kids between the ages of 12 and 18, they need to be exposed to that. But you know what the age, the most dominant age now for reading young adult literature is? 21 to 45. So the complexity that's offered in and the points that are offered by young adult literature are increasing throughout that age group. I did a talk the other night. I promised I wasn't going to do this, that I was going to take over, but I did, didn't I? I'm talking. I did 2 book reviews with ladies who are my age, 60 and over. And when I did the first book review of a young adult novel, they were kind of, well, we don't want to read young adult lit. And then at the end of the presentation, 5 out of the 8 ladies came up and said, do you have more books about this subject that we can read about? So it's not just a 12 to 18 group of people that read young adult literature. It's expanding, and I think that's exciting. So anyway,
Can I
Chrissy,
hijack what
I'm
you
sorry?
said? I was just going to say, I think that as adults, we're always, to greater or lesser degree, some version of who we were as children or as young people. So I think going back and putting yourself in that situation is tremendously valuable in terms of insight for where you are now. And that's really circulating a lot for people that would say, you know, young adult literature is not something I'm going to read. That argument that you lose that part of your personality if you can't connect and can't, you know, look back. So I'm hijacking. But
No, that's great. I wanted the, Shaylin, were you going to say something? I thought.
I actually, how did you know?
I don't
She
know.
gets a look.
Did she do the splits again?
we communicate telepathically. I think that a lot of times the people that censor these books censor them because it would just go over students' heads, they wouldn't understand it, and a lot of times that kind of goes off of this idea that young adults nowadays and millennials especially are just selfish. They don't really care to learn about these issues. They don't really focus on education that much. We're just lazy and we don't really want to learn about the world. We just are content to sit on our cell phones and not learn about anything. But young adults want to talk about these things. Students want to have these discussions. This is what's interesting to students. It's not interesting for them to sit there and read boring literature that doesn't have this stuff in it. It's interesting for them to see this, and not that literature that way is boring, but
Watch it, you're an English.
I'm sorry. I know. That's not okay. That came out wrong. That's not what I meant to say.
Back off.
These are things that students want to talk about. These are things that students want to address. In my own experience, it's not the students that don't want to talk about issues of police brutality or things that are going on in society. They want to talk about it. They want to make a change. They want to be socially minded. It's the people that are banning these books that don't want to address these issues.
They don't want their kids to have an opinion. They want their kids to have their opinion. Like that's what the adults that enforce these rules are doing. They want their kids to believe what they believe, so they can't learn anything at school, because then they might formulate their own opinion.
And to save myself from the other comment, if you can give me a piece of literature that does not have something that could possibly be taken controversially by somebody out there that you would say is just excellent and top-notch, then please, I would love to hear about it. So.
Well, look at some of our most traditional books in English. Catcher in the Rye has been banned, censored for years. To Kill a Mockingbird. The Bible is on the list to be censored in the last, 10 years. So it's just how you define censorship. It's kind of scary. But anyway, I'm taking over again. So, Chrissy, how about you, dear?
What I think about these books is they represent the complexity of young readers and young adults and teenagers and whoever's reading them. But you really get this perspective of these intrinsic thought processes of young people. When I'm thinking especially about one of my favorite books, The Perks of Being a Wallflower, I think about how when I first read that, I was in 8th grade. It's a banned book because it's pretty sexually explicit. There's some stuff in there that... And
suicide, too.
There's some stuff in there that maybe I shouldn't have been reading in 8th grade, but, that's what level I was at. So, and I was comfortable with reading that kind of thing. So, but I'm a little bit warped, I'll admit it.
If Kat agrees with you, then you've got a problem.
Anyway, but that book was one of the first things that kind of made me feel like it was okay to feel kind of sad sometimes. It was okay to be depressed. There's another side to it. You can overcome things in your struggles. And that was one of the first things that I really felt like I connected to, because it's written like a diary. It's like Charlie's one of your friends. And you know what? Like, maybe your friends aren't telling you that they feel sad or that they feel depressed, but they can read that book and know that somebody out there, even if they're fictional, has felt that way too. And they can connect to that kind of thing. But if we censor these books, it keeps them from getting that perspective. It says, no, you can't feel like that. It says, no, you can't feel like that because we will not let you feel like that. You have to be okay all the time. And that's not what we should be doing. Not to mention the fact that that book deals with drug use, drinking, partying. These are things that people are going out there doing. And just saying like, oh yeah, you can't read this book, it's not going to stop them from going out and partying and experimenting. It's just going to make them want to do it more if you tell them not to. So that's one of the problems we face with censorship. It not only says, oh yeah, we can't talk about these things, but it's like we can't talk about them, but we still don't want you to do them, but we won't even try to counsel you about them if you do decide to do them. It cuts off conversations. It keeps people from talking to each other in a productive and creative way. It keeps people from doing things. It keeps them from expressing themselves to gain experiences and emotions. And we have no problem with letting our children watch Game of Thrones. Like, oh yeah, you're a 13-year-old watching Game of Thrones. Cool. Like, if it's okay for you to let your kid watch Game of Thrones, then fine. But the problem with that is that we don't censor TV or video games as much as books. People read one passage from a book and they're like, oh crap, they said something about sex, ban it! That's what they're saying to us. And then we let them go on the internet. I swear some of these books are tame compared to the comment section on a YouTube video. So banning them serves no purpose. It just cuts people off from real world experiences, cuts them off from feeling anything beyond what they already know. It keeps them from experiencing new things through the worlds of books in a safe way. You can read about having sex and doing drugs, but it doesn't hurt you, but it gives you the experience of it. And that way, it keeps your teenagers more safe, because through that book they have experienced these things. And they realize the dangers and the pitfalls of them, and then they can say, okay, so this is what I think it's wrong. It helps shape people morally even. It helps you decide, no, I don't think that goes with my belief system, or yes, that does. And it helps you create an identity. So with the censorship of books, We're cutting off expression, we're cutting off the creation of identity, and we're basically just sugarcoating the world into thinking it's all peaches and cream, but it's really not.
I'm so glad you're quiet.
Don't really think.
Admire that about her.
Do you want me to keep going?
That's why these people are on this panel. They feel very strongly about reading and the importance of literature and books in their lives. And I think what Chrissy said is that these kids read, and it's not kids, like I said, the adults are reading these books too, that it gives them a sense of you're not alone, that other people are going through this. In fact, Judy was talking about a book today in our 697 class, and she was reading it, and she said she was so entranced in it, or so, I'm not sure what the word was that you used.
I was just so much, like, that was my world at that moment. Like, everything about that book was just like, it was my world. So when my husband and my daughter were in the kitchen laughing, like, I was angry. I had to leave. I went downstairs to the basement to finish the book.
Stay in your world.
Because they were in this world that was, like, so different than, like, what I was living at that moment, that it was changing me, like, in that, it was hard to explain, but I was very moody reading that book because, like, I didn't understand why the world kept going on when something this heartbreaking could happen.
Yeah. She's talking about Sold. It's a book about trafficking of young women. So, but I think that's neat because you have two people in your world, but they're not in your world at that point. And you say, please get out of it, or I'm going to go somewhere else. So, but that's what literature does. Okay, Gabby, what do you think, dear?
What everyone is speaking about right now, how like you can relate through books and how it makes you feel not alone. That's what inspired me to be an English major and to be a teacher. Is because I remember taking Mrs. Wilson's literature class, and Sarah can remember there was times where it was very emotional in there because we did deal with bullying, we dealt with sexual assault, we dealt with victimization, and I remember sitting there thinking, had I read this in high school when I was being bullied, my whole world would have changed. I've been like, gosh, other people are feeling this way. It's okay that I feel like this. It's okay that sometimes I want to be sick and I don't want to go to school because I'm worried about what's going to happen to me that day. And you know, I also had to think, had my teachers taught me this in school, maybe that bully would have realized what they were doing to you. Maybe they would have realized the pain that they were causing that other person, and maybe, just maybe, they would have stopped. And they would have put themselves in my shoes. And then I was able to put myself in that bully's shoes too. Like, gosh, maybe they had a rough life too. Maybe they were going through this. That's why they did it to me. And you know, that's why I like this book, because it brings to light like mental illness and what goes on with school shootings. And I feel that we censor books because we fear that if we talk about sex, if we talk about drugs, if we bring to light that there are bullies in school, that people commit suicide due to bullies, that God forbid they commit a school shooting because they're bullied, that it will happen. If I tell a kid, oh, read The Diary of Absolutely True Indian, they might think, oh, wow, it might bring to light that they might have a parent that has alcohol abuse problems, that they have an alcoholic parent. And then that parent, like their idea of that parent might change. If I bring a book that deals with sex, that child might want to have sex now, when really I may have just prevented teenage pregnancy, and I may have also just prevented the spread of STDs because they read, okay, maybe this is something I should keep within like a committed relationship. Teaching these kids issues such as sex or sexual violence or gender violence or mental illness isn't going to inspire them to do it. It's going to educate them. And when you educate them, they no longer want to rebel and they no longer want to experience with things such as drugs or sex or unprotected sex, anything like that. So we're hurting kids more than we are helping them by censoring them from these issues. And I thought it was amazing. I had never even thought to look up a book that might be about a school shooting because that's a scary thing to think about. It's scary to think about there might be a school shooting and you think, oh, it'll never happen in my school. It's not like that. But just last month, well, it's still September, on September 15th, there was a school shooting in Texas. I didn't hear about it on the news. So this thing is happening more often than we know. And so to bring it into a classroom and say, hey, this is a reality. It's sad, but this is a reality. This can happen. But bring it to the students, what can we do to prevent that in our school? What are things that we could be looking for? And providing them resources like, if you do think that you are suicidal, or if you are being bullied, let's provide you resources with that before we get to the point where you decide to take actions into your own hands, whether that's ending your own life or someone else's. So So I just think it's very important to bring to light these issues, whether it be mental illness, sexual violence, bullying, anything like that. We're harming students more than we are helping them by preventing them from reading.
Okay. If you have questions, please just raise your hand or speak up.
I have a comment. I think what you're saying, Gabby, is kind of what I wanted to say as well. But when we don't talk about things and we cut off conversations about, oh, this is how I'm feeling at school, like they might think, oh yeah, I'm being bullied at school, I just need to suck it up, because that's what people think that you need to do. You need to just be tough and stand up for yourself. And maybe you can't stand up for yourself, you know? But maybe these books will provide an outlet to people who are being, or students who are being bullied, to say, I can do this and this and this, and it'll help me. But if we just stop talking about it, then it's like having, I don't know, like a scab, maybe, and you just keep picking it, and eventually it's gonna start bleeding. Bad metaphor.
Is Dr. Duffy grading the metaphors? Are you? No?
That was an F. So, but what I'm trying to say is if you ignore it, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse until eventually it comes to a head and it breaks everywhere.
It's like a
So,
splinter that you leave in your finger.
exactly. Yes, Aaron, that's
Take care
it.
of it, then it'll
Better
get
metaphor.
infected.
Or tumor that is growing.
Yeah.
Growth.
But if you ignore bullying, then it does turn into this. This is a manifestation of a smaller problem that could be dealt with at a smaller level. Like, stop it when it's, the point is to stop things before they turn into and escalate into these things. But if you aren't having these conversations and coming up with solutions and talking about things, then you do have the poorly tended to splinter problem. Yes.
I'd like to talk about one real event before we get to Trey. As a result of Gabby's paper and the material that she read in a Comp 2 class that she was in with me, another student in that class had a brother that was being bullied. And I don't understand what the connection was or whatever. But anyway, this girl went home to Burlington, Colorado, and talked to her parents about the fact that she thought that her brother was being bullied. And the parents didn't think that that was an issue. But anyway, she was there over Oktoberfest weekend. Her brother was a freshman in high school, and he came home after a horrible bullying accident. And she was there, she found him trying to hang himself and saved his life. So the impact that she had, and that all of us have had on another person, we don't realize it. But through reading what she read, doing the paper and expressing what she went through, impacted this young girl to confront her brother, to talk to her brother, and talk to her parents, and actually saved her brother's life. And then the parents took over and went to the school, and so censorship is not a good thing. I think we all agree with that. Okay, so Trey, I'll get off my high horse and you can visit with whatever book you're talking about. I think it's Night by Alec. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
So I wanted to discuss the importance of reading culturally rich books, such as Night by L.A. Wiesel. And I came to this conclusion through reading The Book Thief in our young adult literature class. By denying children, or by denying students the opportunity to read something as culturally rich as Night or The Book Thief, you're really denying them the rest of the world. It's their opportunity to learn about different cultures, to learn about other things in the world. I'm not saying that like the individual problems that people have aren't serious. I'm just addressing like the opposite thing.
We know, don't worry. We won't yell at you. Don't worry, Trey.
By addressing things on like a bigger scale, people are they're more empathetic to the things that happen. Like they understand that the Holocaust, it was a terrible event that happened, but it's a part of our history, and it's something that we need to understand in order to move forward in history as human beings ourselves. But now, like, well, what's the branding? Scholastic, like a brand that is associated with like young people's books who make. Yeah. Yeah, they like these publications. They're making books that are full of information about people and events. So you can pick up a Scholastic book, and I found it in Hastings because they're closing and they got huge book sales. I found in Hastings that Scholastic's made a book that said what is 9/11, and it goes through the events of that day. And I just flipped through it, but it didn't break it down by the numbers. But it explains to these young readers what this tragedy was, and it kind of made me start thinking, like, does Scholastic make books about the Holocaust or the Cambodian genocide? Things like events that shaped our world that affect us on a very individual basis. I mean, we don't go onto airplanes just for fun. We have to go through TSA. We have to have all of our things inspected. We have to ourselves be inspected, and it's just a part of life. And all of this stems from a 24-hour period back in 2001. If it weren't for that day, September 11th, 2001, I mean, we could probably just things in an airport wouldn't be as strict, but it's something that is a part of our lives now. And like, to bring it back to Night by Elie Wiesel, it's a very graphic book in the way he describes his experience with the concentration camp. It's something that has shaped his life on an individual basis. He was a man struggling to live and had to do some extraordinary things in order to preserve his life. Like, the most vivid thing I remember about Night was him feeding somebody hiding in a pile of bodies. They had mass graves in concentration camps, and there was, I don't remember the relationship, but there was a person hiding in this mass grave in order to preserve their life because they just wanted to run away from the concentration camp. And he was being fed by everybody else at the camp because that was just the way that they could support that person. But if, to tie it all back, but if we're denying young adults, our students, the opportunity to read these books, to just dive into this culturally rich novel, such as The Book Thief or Night, we can learn about a people and their way of life, but also the way that they were treated.
Well, I think Shaylin, the book that changed her major was Between Shades of Gray, about the Lithuanian Holocaust, and being able to read that, and so.
I just want to make one more comment. I think it's so amazing, just listening to Trey talk about the variety of things books can deal with. It's amazing that we have books as resources, not only to identify with personally, but to learn about cultural differences as well. It's just amazing that I'm able to pick up a book, and instead of being desensitized by the news, I can learn about the Holocaust. I can learn about a school shooting, and it's presented to me in a way where I can form my own opinion, and I am able to learn about it in a way that I don't learn about it every single day through an adult or through the media. It's amazing that books offer that.
And not only that, Gabby, but when you watch the news, it's like they're just telling you facts. Like, this is what happened, we know who it was, blah, 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 fact. But when you read a book about something, you get that feeling of what it was like to be there and what it was like to experience these things.
You get to live in that world.
You get to live it. It's not that you want to live some of these things,
but sometimes you should, because then you're actually empathetic and you gain a deeper understanding of just how terrible it was. We may hear, oh, there was mass graves, there was this, but until you actually read that, until you actually know what it was like for them to starve, for them to be a child killing someone like in the Cambodian genocide, until you read that and until you get to feel that, you'll never truly understand it. And I think that that's the best way to learn is through literature, because you get that feeling, and feeling is the best thing. I love books that make me cry and make me angry and make me passionate. It's the best.
It makes the facts more easier to absorb a little bit, because it helps you to feel it, and it doesn't have that detachedness like the news does. It helps you to experience it and make it feel like it's actually something that could be happening in your own backyard or part of your past or people you know who have experienced it. It just helps you connect to the world more than the news does. Yeah, darn that news.
You don't see books being written about small town Kansas, going to school every day and then working on a farm, and then having that span out 400 pages. There's a reason why these books are being written. It's because people want this information to spread. They want their books to be read in order to maybe develop empathy within other people, or just to inform them of, like, this is something that happened. This is things that people went through.
I readily agree with all of these young people here, but I mean, I have some parents who are extremely supportive of the Hayes Public YA Advice Library, Barnard Library, and so I read a mass of things through 12 and 18. So if you have a chance to volunteer there, a lot of young adult librarians are our age, so go for it. But I would also say not just focusing on relating emotionally to our peers and to our students and everything, but relating to older generations and understanding the experiences that they went through. Like, I worked as a CNA for 5 years now. And until you read about those war experiences and those traumatic processes and growing up, and there are things from our perspective maybe they're not as exciting, in the 1920s, but I can better understand my residents who have PTSD, who are nonverbal, but will yell and cry if we do not, shield them from the noise of the fireworks on 4th of July, or close the blinds when there's a thunderstorm. Or my older residents who, I may not be vulgar German, but they have that background and experience. And maybe if we had a more ethnically diverse CNA class coming through to shield those young individuals from some comments. But even though you may not agree with their opinions or, the way that they act upon those things, and I'm by no means condoning them, you can understand the perspective they're coming from, because they lived through a time period where they were scared to death of something, whereas we have people who are very, biased towards Muslims or Islam or things of that nature. They lived through that period, and we're not necessarily coming out with the same prejudices that they are, because we're able to be exposed to all these different perspectives. But to understand the history and perspective of where we came from and all the advantages that we have been given to even be on this campus right now, I think is a beautiful thing. So.
And see, that's what I was trying to get at. It's like people don't want to read about some student walking into a library every day to sit at a computer and work on homework. We want to learn about these different experiences that the rest of the world has gone through, that vets have gone through.
We want to live viscerally through those types of things.
Yeah. That an immigrant coming to this country and trying, being wide-eyed and not understanding the language, there are all of those stories and resources there. If we allow kids, encourage them to take the time.
It's these stories that really open up our mind. I've been in Kansas pretty much my whole life. I was born in America, but my father and his family came from the Philippines. And it's those stories that they tell me that really make the impact of my thoughts on immigration and American citizenship. It's things like that that have an impact on me, and stories that I can share with other people. And that might, maybe if they wanted to write a book, that might sway other people the way it did me to think about immigration laws, immigration policy, and American citizenship.
It kind of scares me to see that some of these are banned because of religious viewpoint, because I know I am a Christian and I'm very much dedicated to my faith, but I want people to know when they're thinking about their spirituality, I want them to be able to see from another person's perspective. I think learning about other religions, even if you know what you are, is so important so that you know what you believe, why you believe it, and why you don't believe something else. And if somebody's feeling confused and they live in a household where they're not religious and their family is very, very against religion, I mean, where else can you go but the library to find books about what you want to learn about? Like being able to see the Bible and read the Bible or the Quran or the Torah or whatever you are curious about, just to be able to explore like what you really feel, like those core beliefs. And then seeing some of the other books that were banned for religious perspectives as well, that you get to see like what it's like to live as that religion, and that, oh, maybe people do have the same struggles as you. Like they may look like a perfect Muslim, but they're not, and it's hard, and it's okay for it to be hard because it's hard for everybody. And just knowing that, and like the belief that you can mess up and still be okay, I think is so important. And just knowing that they're censoring that as well is terrifying.
You should look at this list that we were given, like challenge books, and it gives you reasonings why these things were banned. And Tango Makes Three by Justin Richardson and Peter Parnell. Reasons it was banned: anti-family, homosexuality, political viewpoint, religious viewpoint, unsuited for age group, additional reasons it promotes the homosexual agenda. It's like people are suppressing these ideas, these books, because they promote things that they don't like, and that's dangerous.
They don't understand.
That's what I was just going to say, or they don't understand.
I'd like to point out that on that list, there's usually between like 2 to 3 books every year that are banned because of some sort of sexuality that they don't understand, they don't want to talk about it. And some of the books on there are banned because they are books about sexual education.
Which
like,
we don't have in Kansas already.
Why would you ban something that is actively trying to teach something that a lot of people don't get? Like a lot of students around the United States, and especially in other places, they don't get a sexual education course. They get kind of thrown into the world and they have to learn on their own. But there are these people that write dedicated books about like, hey, you can learn this and you don't have to be exposed to all of these awful things to have to learn these things yourself. You can read about it, and they look at it and they see that it talks about sex, and they say, no, we can't put this in a library. And that just, it bothers me that people can do that and restrict another person from being able to learn about something that could possibly save their life someday.
On this list from 2005, the number 10 challenged book is It's So Amazing, a book about eggs, sperm, birth, babies, and families by Robbie H. Harris. Reasons for censoring, sex education and sexual content. From that title, really, I couldn't gather that was about sexual education. I mean, if you're not talking about this stuff in schools and stuff, where are they going to learn it? It's important for your personal health. It's important for your mental health to know about these different facets of sexual education. It's applicable to everyone's life, or anybody who plans on having sex, which is probably everybody who would be reading that book. So,
this article that we got from The Guardian, I highlighted this factoid in here. It says there were a total of 464 complaints were registered by the American Library Association in 2012, and has recorded challenges to more than 11,300 titles since it has first started monitoring in 1982. It estimates that only, and listen, 1 in every 5 attempts to ban a book is recorded. So out of 11,300 titles since 1982, those are the things that have been recorded.
I think that's times 5.
Those are the attempts that people have tried to suppress these stories, these ideas.
and it's
He's getting violent.
It's knocking things over. And it's like what Jacinta was saying, this article mentions that it's not about sexual assault, it mentions about suicide. If we talk about suicide, it says here, it's challenged a lot because the book 13 Reasons Why, which is about a girl who sends a box of cassettes to the 13 people who made her decide to commit suicide. 13's read, it says it's challenged a lot because parents are concerned that it's about suicide, Stripling said. She added that the American Library Association monitors research on the effects of reading materials and has found no evidence that reading about suicide encourages teenagers to take their own lives. So if they can prove that people reading these books are not influenced to commit suicide, then why are people worried about that being a possibility?
I think if anything, it helps them.
Yeah.
It helps them to relate to what's going on. It helps them to realize that it's not that bad, that it's going to be okay.
Or that there's other options.
Yeah.
Or the
That's
effects
like-
that
that
it might
takes
have
me-
later on their family, their friends, the effects that taking your own life has on others as well.
Yeah, that takes me back to the thing on like sexuality. There's so many people that are struggling with being homosexual or having that are different, that think that it's not okay because society makes it seem like it's not okay. I read the novel Aristotle and Dante. Actually.
Did you really?
Yes, it's so good, and it's about a guy that's struggling. It's like he doesn't think that he's gay. He's just when you start reading the book, you don't even think that he anything to do with homosexuality, but throughout the novel, he realizes that he's in love with his best friend, like, the whole time. And it's because he's scared. He hates himself. He doesn't want to be gay. So we have to allow our kids to read this because there are kids that feel like that. They're scared. They don't want to be this way because they think that society is against them. It's not fair.
The topics discussed in these books are issues that children and students, these are issues that people are going through. And as a parent, as someone, as an administrator, as anyone that would want to censor these books, if you think that by censoring these things and preventing your children from being exposed to material that could help them, that could give them something to relate to, if you think that by censoring that you're protecting them, you're not. You're being selfish.
Since we're talking about sex and death, this is a great opportunity for me to start talking about
Great
stars.
segue.
Yeah, great segue.
Yeah.
I apologize. I have a 1:30 class, and you guys have so much enthusiasm, so I'm going to jump in here. So, The Fault in Our Stars, actually the title is derived from Shakespeare. But I want to do something simple. I want to talk to you about why you should read this banned book, and I'm going to come at it from the angle of a creative writer. So if you read to know that you're not alone, I think that you write because you truly believe that somewhere out in the world is someone that needs that piece of writing that you're going to produce. That it's like a love letter of sorts, that you don't really honestly know how a book is going to affect someone when they pick it up. Flannery O'Connor famously said that if you worry about that, you're taking on God's work, but you send out a book into the world not knowing what effect it's going to have, but because you believe that it matters and that someone should read the book. So to that end, The Fault in Our Stars, my quick game plan is to give you a little bit of an overview, why it was banned, what John Green had to say about it, and why I'd hope you would read this specific banned book. So The Fault in Our Stars is about a teenage girl named Hazel Grace Lancaster, and she has cancer and she is dying. She meets the love of her life, Augustus Waters, during a support group meeting, and one of the main issues they're dealing with is this fear of oblivion, this fear of death throughout the book, and it's one of the reasons the book got banned. But this is what Hazel Grace says when Augustus says in support group that he's worried about not leaving a legacy, not making a mark. She says this: "There will come a time," I said, "when all of us are dead, all of us. There will come a time when there are no human beings remaining to remember that anyone ever existed, or that our species ever did anything. There will be no one left to remember Aristotle or Cleopatra, let alone you. Everything that we did and built and wrote and thought and discovered will be forgotten, and all of this," I gestured encompassingly, "will have been for naught. Maybe that time is coming soon, and maybe it's millions of years away, but even if we survive the collapse of our sun, we will not survive forever. There was a time before organisms experienced consciousness, and there will be a time after. And if the inevitability of human oblivion worries you, I encourage you to ignore it. God knows that everyone else does." That's hard to hear, but whether you're a young adult or an older adult, you can't help but think about oblivion, right? And you have Kafka, who says that we don't need pretty flowery books, we need difficult books. We need books that are like an axe for the frozen sea within us, and that's why I feel like you should be reading John Green. So, spoiler alert, as we come to the end of the novel, Augustus Waters falls in love with Hazel Grace, and he talks to her about his fear of oblivion. This is the last quote I'm going to read to you from the book. He says this: "He was staring at me, and I could see the corners of his eyes crinkling." That's Hazel narrating. "I'm in love with you, and I'm not in the business of denying myself the simple pleasure of saying true things. I'm in love with you. And I know that love is just a shout into the void, and that oblivion is inevitable, and that we're all doomed, and that there will come a day when all our labor has been returned to dust. And I know the sun will swallow the only earth we'll ever have, and I am in love with you. So at that point, you know that Augustus gets that oblivion is inevitable, and he in fact is dying. Some parents thought that this was too morbid of a book because of the consideration of death, and then to top it off, Augustus and Hazel Grace have sex shortly after that passage, and there's actually a cute drawing showing himself outside of the circle of virgins now. He's very excited, but you can tell, right, that a parent would be concerned about that. And within the book itself, you get this consideration of, you know, they're so young, is what they're experiencing a true and legitimate love? And that's kind of troubling, you know, qualifying love based on age. And so I like that the book kind of beats down that notion that just because a love is a young love doesn't mean it can't be a fully mature love, doesn't mean that it shouldn't necessarily be expressed sexually. Now, as a parent, you know, looking at that perspective of things, you can go, wow, this book makes me really nervous. But again, to get back to Flannery O'Connor, you don't know the effect that it would have, but to think about it, you know, could be potentially helpful. To give you some background, so it created a media storm when The Fault in Our Stars was actually banned, because by this time it had gotten into a novel adaptation, and so Vanity Fair actually covered it. What happened was one mom, Karen Kruger, felt that the plot was morbid, that it had crude language, and that the sexual content was inappropriate for children. And she said, I just didn't think it was appropriate for an 11, 12, 13-year-old to read. So after that, she convinced a committee of teachers, parents, a librarian, and a principal who voted 6-1 to then pull the best-selling John Green novel out of middle schools in that district. So this is what John Green's reaction to that was. He says this, I guess I'm both happy and sad. I'm happy because apparently young people in Riverside, California will never witness or experience mortality since they won't be reading my book, which is great for them. But I'm also sad because I was really hoping I would be able to introduce the idea that human beings die to the children of Riverside, California, and thereby crush their dreams of immortality, which sounds like a horrible thing to do, but realistically, we're probably not going to be immortal, right? So then, this is a mouthful, the National Coalition Against Censorship, the NCAC, whose motto is freedom to explore, freedom to think, freedom to create. They got in on the discussion, and ultimately, after receiving letters from both the NCAC and the ACLU of Southern California, they decided to amend the policies, and so now board members do get a vote on if things are banned, which they didn't before this happened. The school board didn't get a vote, and has since, been removed in that particular school district. So I think that is at least an encouraging note. But getting back to this idea of why should we value banned books, why should we read them? I believed so much in young adult literature and banned books, after taking the class almost 4 years ago, that I went back to become a creative writer. So it's just had a tremendous impact on me. And I think the issues that are most relevant to young adults are no less relevant, to their parents. Can be a great gateway for conversation in terms of talking about a book. And I guess the last thing, I'm so ripping off so many great authors today, but Baldwin's idea, I just want to paraphrase, that you write in order to change the world, knowing perfectly well that you probably can't, but also knowing that reality changes according to perception, and that if you can alter, even by a millimeter, the way people perceive reality, then you can affect change. And that's why you should go read a banned book. You might change someone. So that's kind of it.
I have a comment. Sorry. Another one of John Henry's books that's banned is Looking for Alaska.
That's a top one.
This summer. And that book also has some really explicit. That book also has some really explicit sexual scenes in it, and it's they talk to John Green saying young teenagers are reading your book and you have the scene in it, and don't you think that's going to be suggestive? And he's like, anything but suggestive. It's really awkward and it's horrible, and both parties go wishing that they hadn't done that. So, he's like, it's not suggestive. How can you think it is suggestive? And like we were talking earlier, I think it just goes really well with that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great comment, and also the fact of, while teenagers, young adults might have a conversation with their parents about sex, they're probably not going to ask them about the specifics, right? Because then mom or dad would go, why are you wanting to know the specifics? And it might trigger some alarms. So if they've had some experience of that vicariously and have some scenarios in their mind for how that might happen, it might be a less scarring experience, less traumatic experience. They might be able to actually enjoy it. I don't know for sure, but something to think about.
They can at least have their own ideas,
Yeah.
because like you guys were talking about earlier.
Well, just the whole process of critical thinking. I'm sorry.
If we don't want teenagers reading about books where teenagers fall in love and have sex and possibly die, why are we still teaching Romeo and Juliet?
I'd
We
like
have
to
a
see.
Shakespeare expert. You should ask
Why
her.
are we still teaching Romeo and Juliet?
I wouldn't teach it in high school, but yeah, I mean, I think the reason I wouldn't is because it's usually misunderstood. Not that there's anything particularly wrong with it, but yeah, I mean, it's like other books in that students tend to be engaged with it because of the things that they're usually not able to read somewhere else.
True. I'd like to have a course that paired young adult novels with canon novels. Like To Kill a Mockingbird and Roll of Thunder, so that you could get, the different perspectives. And one of the things that is good about the Common Core standards is the emphasis now on nonfiction. And I think nonfiction needs to be paired with fiction in college courses and in young adult literature. So most of the authors that we've talked about today do a great deal of research and make their novels historically accurate, whether it's Never Fall Down or Between Shades of Grey or Book Thief. So they have a value in that way. The one shortcoming that is, I think, actually being handled now is the number of books on that deal with homosexuality with solid characters who are going through trauma. I have 2 books in young adult lit that deal with those issues, and there are more coming out now, and that's an issue of diversity. Gender is an issue of diversity that I think we need to tackle at various levels. And I think religion that you brought up before, the diversity there, I can still remember reading Catcher in the Rye. It has nothing to do with religion. I'm doing a segue where I'm not sure where I'm going. But Catcher in the Rye was a seminal work for me when I read that book. I wasn't allowed to read it in school. I went to a Catholic school. You couldn't read things like that in a Catholic school. But I snuck it under the covers like I did, what was the book, you guys, I was telling you about in class, and I forgot? Gone with the Wind. I had to read it under the covers because my mother wouldn't let me read it because I had to.
That makes a big bump under the cover.
I'm sorry?
That makes a big bump under the cover.
Well, and I had to buy my own flashlight,
Right.
because
Really
my
is
parents
so
were
much
dead and I had to
easier.
cover it up. I mean, it was really a pretty sad thing.
Flashlights were banned in my house.
Yes,
My
I see.
sister and I did that too much.
So, anyway. Does anybody else have another comment about any question for the panel?
Mrs. Wilson, I have a question that kind of reverses this. Because you've been talking about institutional censorship, which usually involves an individual, unfortunately. But what do you make of trigger warnings? Because those become self-censorship. And is that an issue? Because we're at university, we are pressured or may be pressured to institute such things as trigger warnings, which would allow someone to opt out of a book.
So I think that the issue with trigger warnings is that a lot of times they're misunderstood. I think that a lot of times people take them to mean, like, you could say, like, trigger warning, gender violence, and someone that's just a total misogynist could be like, oh, this isn't something that I want to read because I don't care about it, because obviously, like, women deserve to be beat up or something like that. I don't know, like, they could choose not to read it. Or a lot of times, especially around here, it's looked at as like, oh my gosh, people just can't read anything anymore. They're so easily offended. But the purpose of a trigger warning is, let's say that we're reading a book about gender or sexual assault. And so you put a trigger warning on it saying this book contains information about sexual assault. Well, someone that has been sexually assaulted, it might be very triggering them. It might take them back to the point of that trauma. And so what that is it's a warning for them to say, hey, this might bring up some feelings that you don't particularly want to address, at least not in this situation. Now you know. So they can kind of choose to not expose themselves to things that will set them off and things that will put them back in the place of a traumatic experience.
I feel like trigger warnings in a way is no different than if you were to pick up a book on the shelf, off the shelf, and it has a picture on the front of two people having sex. And so you look at that and you think, you know, I don't really want to read this. This probably doesn't look like something I would enjoy, so you put it back. It's no different than, say, you have a trigger warning on a book that says this book contains graphic images of, or graphic descriptions of someone being brutally murdered in the street. And somebody who's been around that, like say they grew up in a bad neighborhood and they've been around gang violence their whole life, and so they pick that up and they say, well, you know, I don't really want to read this because I've already been exposed to that. I don't need to go through it again. It's not something that I really want to relive. So they can just put it back down and say, you know, I'll move on, I'll try something different.
I think, go ahead. I was just going to say, coming at it from the angle of an instructor, I think, you know, maybe in theory, not such a bad idea. The word choice bothers me. Trigger warnings, you immediately get that negative connotation, like a gunshot, like something bad. You know, it could in essence be like a book jacket that's boiled down to just 2 or 3, you know, key themes that perhaps might be upsetting for some people. But I think, you know, intellectual freedom at its core, when you're at, you know, a place of learning, you have to accept that you're going to be exposed to things that make you uncomfortable, and that by considering them, perhaps you might adopt new viewpoints. So whether or not we should have or not have them or rename them, I'm not sure, but I think that the idea behind it was perhaps to make people more comfortable, which is not in and of itself a bad thing. So
I thought literature was meant to make you uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's just strike the frozen sea within you. That's true. I mean, I guess it just depends what context you're looking at. And in a classroom, you know, you might not have all students who are literature, you know, enthusiasts, and it might really cause, you know, some conflict with them, or even some issues with the instructor if they feel like the instructor is, you know, teaching something that they feel particularly strong about. So it's kind of, I think, I can tell from your expression you don't agree, but I think, you know, that when you're teaching content, the waters can get kind of murky, and that you would hope that students and instructor and everyone will feel comfortable, and that's hard to do. That might be why trigger warnings came up. So.
Yeah, what I would be worried about is the proverbial slippery slope. Having grown up in a very repressive period of time, obviously on the gray hair shows, in a very conservative area of Missouri, in a very conservative school district. Heavens, you know, Hester and Dimmesdale in Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, it was censored my senior year. So I think I'm probably a little paranoid at things like trigger warnings. And I think I'm a pretty empathetic person. I would be worried that it could be followed by something else, not necessarily just in your case, but in the world of children.
I would also like to say that you all have been kind of advocating about pushing boundaries here, talking about you can't have a conversation if you're not allowed to have a conversation, or you can't, you know, understand something unless you've really been immersed in it or exposed in it. And trigger warnings work against that. So, I mean, maybe sometimes there's a possibility that it could actually be a healing experience. It might be difficult and it might be scary, but maybe it's a good thing. So, you know, I'm worried too about the opt-out, because I think sometimes opting out might hurt you more than help you.
Yeah. I read an article by a psychologist, because we've been having a lot of these kinds of discussions in my house, because my dad is a very staunch, angry, what we like to call a gun Republican that only really cares about issues that save his guns, which hurts me on a personal and physical level. So we've been discussing it, and he wasn't really understanding the concept, and BuzzFeed did an interview with like a clinical psychologist to discuss trigger warnings. And one of the things that they say is when they establish these trigger warnings with their patients. It's that the patient at first they will avoid it because it brings back bad memories, but as they continue to heal, they start to make the choice to see that there is a trigger warning on something, and they can mentally prepare themselves with the techniques that they've thought up with their psychologists, so that there is a point where they can start integrating those kinds of things back into their life. So they're not sheltered for their whole life after the event happens, but they just have enough time to kind of make that mental buffer and to, you know, realize that maybe it wasn't their fault that they got raped, or that something, make the realization that can help comfort them, so that they can choose when they see the trigger warnings, they can begin to kind of ease themselves back into those topics without completely ruining everything that they had already, all the progress that they had made. So I thought that was really interesting. It was really informative.
We have someone in the back door. Yeah.
So I originally wanted to go to school for counseling, but I found out a lot of what Megan has, like re-exposure, people employ that with like phobias and different things. You know, you think about, say they're scared of dogs, you think about petting a dog, you know, hold a stuffed dog, like that kind of re-exposure, allowing people, I wouldn't necessarily, it's a shaky territory to say if they should be allowed to opt out or not. I mean, that is a choice for them to self-advocate, but like, having those materials available, and maybe they discern from the theme, you know, they can choose to stop reading a book. They can choose, but sometimes I think it might discourage people from, like, to shy away from, like, readdressing those subjects. I know we advocate with the Kelly Center for Mental Health on this campus. We advocate for people to do that kind of thing. Maybe they can't afford to attend counseling or, you know, have a professional psychologist present, but to be able to re-experience a trauma that's somewhat similar to theirs, you know, might be beneficial for them in the long run. Say, I was in a couple like traumatic car accidents, like I had to slowly readjust myself to, you know, getting in a car, driving short distances, things like that, even though that brought me a lot of anxiety. But it's a really shaky territory. I mean, we should encourage people in some cases to like re-experience and maybe address feelings that they weren't able to fully process before.
Well, it's getting kind of late. I'd like to thank the panel for spending their time getting this ready. The students and faculty that came to hear their spiel, some of them were goofy, but you know, some of them really on target. Thanks, son, for coming. I didn't, you know, mention you before. I just saw you appear now. He's my adopted son. So
he's been here the whole time. He's been here the whole time.
Have you really? Oh my gosh! You can tell I'm just self-absorbed that I didn't notice him. But if any of you are, I should have done this earlier, and I just thought about it about 5 minutes ago. If any of you are interested in reading young adult literature on particular subjects, I have an extensive bibliography that I'd be willing to share with you. If you want to just send me an email, swilson@fhsu.edu, on subjects from the chocolate factory, Chocolate Wars, which is the book that really changed young adult literature up until a book that was just published last week. So if you'd like a list, if you're interested in reading any young adult literature, I'd be happy to send it to you by email. So just let me know. And thank you all.
Yeah, guys, another round of applause because this was awesome.